When most people think of Silicon Valley, they think of companies like Apple or Facebook or Uber. Companies started by two co-founders in a dorm room or a garage that quickly grow into billion-dollar corporations that have an impact on all of our lives. In reality, most startups fail. And for those of us who join startups, if we're lucky, we might get one shot at hypergrowth. Mine was Zenefits, which grew from 54 to 1,100 employees in the year that I was there. But our guest today, Jason, has worked for 3. Most recently, he was the head of global customer success at Deal, where he scaled his team from 25 to 140 in under 2 years, and revenue grew from 30 million to 340 million ARR in that time. He'll share with us how he chooses the startups that he joins, how he systematically builds alignment across teams and time zones, and what it takes to truly thrive in hypergrowth. I'm your host, Sarah Roberts, and you're listening to Success Unscripted.
Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Good. How have you been?
Good. Keeping busy. I've got
Sounds like it.
I got a lot of stuff going on, so I appreciate the reschedule.
Yeah, I appreciate you making some time at all. So, first question I always like to ask people is just, how did you get into customer success? Because most people, unless you're right out of college, you didn't start in customer success because it wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah, I definitely did not. Actually spent my 20s as an entrepreneur, totally different industry. I was a real estate developer, commercial developer.
I didn't know that. That's what my dad
Yeah.
does, actually.
Yeah. So I built shopping centers and bought apartment complexes, and it was a lot of fun. And at 28, 29, I thought I'd be done by 35. That's always a good sign.
Like retired?
Yeah. And so 2008 rolled along, and you can guess what happened there. So
Yeah.
at 30 years old, I was starting from scratch. I went back to business school, and not something I really had in the cards originally, but when the time came, it seemed like a perfect time to go do business school. And always knew I wanted to be in tech. That was always a passion of mine. I grew up in Sacramento, which is just 90 miles or so from San Francisco, but a very, very different world.
Yeah.
And I was always attracted to that startup culture and that idea. So I came out of business school and joined Deloitte, working in software implementations. I didn't know what I wanted to do at a startup, but I knew I was interested, and I thought Deloitte was a great place to start to kind of learn the ropes and get software chops. As soon as I learned about customer success and heard about it, I knew that was it. I wasn't interested in new business sales and kind of the hunting aspect.
Right.
I love working with people. I love engaging with people. As soon as I heard what customer success was, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so planned to join a startup after Deloitte, and started learning and reading about customer success at that point.
Cool. Well, and this won't surprise you, but the main reason I wanted to have you on here, besides the fact that you're just fun to talk to, is you have, and I think these are the only 3 startups that you've been in customer success at, and they've each just seen growth that is so unusual. I mean, Intello scaled from 3 million ARR to over 20 million in the 2 years that you were there. And then you joined Directly, which grew from 12 million to 45 in about 2 years. And then most recently at Deal, which is probably the most impressive, where you led the whole team there and helped them grow from 30 million to 340 million.
Yeah, that one was pretty intense.
I mean, that doesn't happen. Like at best, people maybe get one of those in their career. So that's what I want to talk about. Ask you some specific questions about all of that today, but walk me through what that was like.
Yeah, sure. So if I take them collectively, it's really important, number one, to just say there's a lot of luck involved, right? And even these companies that scale, yes, I've scaled 3 companies now. The first one, the stock is literally worthless,
Right.
right? We
Right.
scaled it, and then LinkedIn killed it, and I didn't even exercise my shares of that first one, right? The second one, yes, sold. It was an exit, pretty boring exit, sold to a BPO, um,
What's a
but
BPO?
but business processing outsourcers, but
Okay.
specifically directly in the support space,
Okay.
and they sold to a large support outsourcing company, right? So a really innovative product that essentially sold to the boring industry leaders,
Like
right?
call centers?
Uh, yes, exactly. And then deal, I knew it was going to grow, but of course, did I think it was going to grow from 30 to 350 in the 2 years I was there? Of course not. Um, Generally speaking, though, I do believe you have to be really passionate about what you're doing.
Hmm.
You have to find something you can be passionate about. We've talked about this, and
Yeah.
I don't want to knock on any industry, so I won't call anything out. But there's certain startups where there's great jobs available, and you think, oh yeah, I could do that role. But what they're doing as a company just doesn't interest me.
Mm-hmm.
If you take those roles, you're going to fail, right? They're too hard, right? Startups are too hard.
Yeah. So is it typically the product that you're attracted to? I mean, obviously it's also a combination of customer success and something else, but what is it that makes customer success at some companies more interesting to you than others?
Yeah, yeah, good question. I think it's even a step before that. I think to myself, if I was explaining to my mom's a good example. She asks me regularly, now tell me what you do again.
Yeah.
And if I'm explaining to somebody what my company does, the idea, am I passionate about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I could walk through Intello directly and deal and tell you exactly what it was that I was passionate about, but it's the idea. So
Mm.
yes, the product has to be there. Uh, uh, there has to be smart people building incredible things.
Yeah.
There has to be a good place for you to step in and build. But ultimately, it's a level above that, and it is you have to be passionate about what the company's trying to accomplish.
And so, as a leader during this hyper growth phase, which is kind of the only phase that you've worked in, how do you ensure that expectations are always really clearly set and that roles are clearly defined when all of those things are constantly changing?
Yeah, and I think that's really difficult, but that is ultimately that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Um, Being able to help someone understand what it is we're trying to accomplish as a team, what's expected of them in their role. I
Hmm.
think those are so important. So it's in setting expectations, right? This is what good looks like in the role. Here's
Right.
what we expect of a customer success manager, right? It's not, it can't be, um, it can't be cloudy. It can't be like, well, I thought this is what I was supposed to be doing. You
Right.
really have to lay that out. And maybe other people have lucked out. I have never joined a company where the roles were clearly defined when I stepped in.
Right. Right. And that was going to be my next question is like when do you start to define those? Because as a recruiter, as as best as we can, with the hiring managers that I work with, you try to get those things nailed down in the beginning because it will help you understand who you need to hire and who is going to be successful in that role and then help set them up for success when they join. But it's probably a little bit more of a moving target when you're growing like that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the recruiting aspect, the approach and the conversation that leads up to whether or not we want to talk about this company and it's a good fit, that's a critical conversation, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's important that you do that homework, and that essentially, I think good recruiters are pressing their founders to really pull that out of them,
Yeah.
because they say, hey, we just want someone smart, or someone that can,
Right.
right? Every job description reads the same, right? Right? It's, we want someone that's done this before and has done it well and has had success in X, Y, and Z. Yeah, we know, of course. What the good recruiting process does is it allows someone like me to come in and understand, am I aligned philosophically with what
Mm.
they're trying to accomplish as a company,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I know I'm going to have to step in, and it's never going to be, oh, this is just like the job description read, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be adjustments. We're going to have to make shifts. We're going to have to do all those things. So ultimately, I think it's really important out of the gate to come in and assess that. So once you've joined, you've got to assess that. Assess, like, what was I told I needed to do, and
Mm-hmm.
where are the gaps? Are there blind spots? Are they dead on? What did they miss? Um, that's really where you have to start, is understanding how well do they understand what they need for the
Yes.
company, and because then you got to sell. If that's not the case, you got to help them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but I want to talk about leadership, and some of the best leaders that I have worked with are really good at getting buy-in from the people on their team. And that's what oftentimes can help, when you're going through that really hard startup phase, which there are always ebbs and flows, but like during the shitstorm, if you have buy-in and trust from your team, then a lot of times that can kind of make or break it. So how do you,
It's absolutely required, right?
yeah.
It's
So
you
how do you
have
do
to
that?
build up goodwill, because you're going to have to cash it in, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? That's a great question. And if I perfected this, right? If anybody perfects this, congratulations. But ultimately, I think people really all want the same thing. They
Mm.
want to be heard and understood in their role. They want to have someone who trusts them and someone who has their back, on the leadership side. They
Yeah.
don't want to be micromanaged, right? There's all these things that fill in, but kind of a playbook or pattern I've used that's worked well is, when you come in, if I come into a company and just start dictating, here's the
Mm-hmm.
playbook I used previously,
Yep.
here's what we're doing, sit down and shut up and just do these things. No, nobody wants that. I don't want that. No, nobody wants that, right?
Yeah.
So it's coming in and listening and really understanding from the folks that are already on the ground. Talk to me about your day. How do you spend your average day? How are you spending your week?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what does that look like? If you're in my shoes, I always love this concept: downstream and upstream and lateral. It's such an important question. But if you were in my shoes, what's the first thing you would tackle? What should the
Mm.
priority? What should the priorities be? And what I found is, everywhere I've gone, it hasn't been a surprise, right? I
Yeah.
probably could have stepped in and just listened, just watched for a couple days and laid out my same playbook and kind of the generic pieces, and get a lot of the same response. But the difference is, when you ask and they tell you, you don't say, yeah, I knew that, I saw that. You go, oh man, that's great. That's great feedback,
Mm.
right? Thank you. And then when you're pitching it to the team, when you're pitching let's say there's a big change coming, something that you want to roll out, you say, hey, I was talking with Ryan, and everybody already knows Ryan, and he's the one that everybody trusts and respects. And you say to the team, hey, Ryan and I were talking, and there's something that he came up with, and it's a brilliant idea.
Even
And
if it's something that you've already come up with.
even if I already knew it, right? And that's not, it's not, I mean, I guess it is manipulation a little bit,
Well,
but
I mean,
they're coming up with the ideas,
it's
right?
strategic.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I might have been able to come up with a lot of those same, right? 80% there, 20% from the team. But I want it to look like it's 90% team, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just there trying to help guide the ship. And I'm there. I've got your back. I'm here. I'm here to help. Um, and being available and
Yeah.
being transparent and all those different pieces, right?
Fascinating. I've never heard somebody describe that strategy.
Yeah, secrets
um,
out of the bag. And
yeah.
future listeners or anything, of
Yeah.
course I care. Like I don't want it to come
Yeah.
across like I
Well,
don't care. It's
I mean,
just,
there's nothing malicious or
yeah,
deceitful about it. It's just, it's kind of a little bit of playing politics.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
And I know we're talking mostly team, but just that question of um, what would you do if you were in my shoes? That's a
yeah.
very disarming question. So I ask
Yeah.
that of fellow leaders as well. So if you ask a sales leader, if you're talking to a sales leader, they might not tell you the things they're annoyed that you're doing or focusing on, right? And they're saying you should be doing more of this and that and this, and they're just having that conversation amongst themselves. But if you ask a sales leader, hey, if you're in my shoes,
Yeah.
what would you be focused on, right? They're going to tell you exactly what they think you should be doing, and that helps to surface uh, misalignment,
Yeah.
right, or unity, right? So anything that they're united on, you lean into, and anything where they're saying, "Hey, you should be fully focused on doing whatever it takes to have a client not churn, even when we sell the wrong one," right? That's a conversation point, right? That's a
Yeah.
conversation point where you say, "Hey, we're limited resources. I can chase these ones, but here's where the revenue opportunities are," right? And
Right.
and that's it's just such a powerful question.
Yeah. Because, well, and if I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody on your team, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to give a manager feedback
It's
when
really hard. Yeah.
and they have to ask first most of the time. Um, and otherwise, I mean, it's just too scary. It's like, okay, well, are you going to fire me? Or like, what are you going to
Yeah.
think of it? But to open that up to that then becoming the basis of your working relationship, that's just very powerful.
Right. And there's actually something psychological about it too. It's very hard for me to say, "Hey, Sarah, when you do this, it bothers me." It's much easier for me to say, hypothetically speaking, if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't do this. I'd do that. Right? It's just a it's a it's
Okay.
it's a much friendlier approach,
So it's
right?
even a way to give feedback in a more compassionate way.
Yeah, yeah. Or to let me restate, to solicit feedback from someone less mature in their career that is
Mm.
not comfortable telling their boss or their boss's
Yeah.
boss any feedback. I'm also a big fan, really big fan of anonymous surveys. I would regularly solicit feedback from my team anonymously, um, and you get better, you just get better feedback, right? But being transparent, being open, being a full human,
Mm.
and engaging in that way, I think helps to create that culture.
Yeah. And in the past, you've talked a little bit about the concept of the 10 commandments and helping, making sure that
Yeah.
everybody's aligned. And can you tell me more about that?
Yes. So taking even a step back from that, um, hyper growth, and when everything's moving very quickly, or deal specifically,
Yeah.
I got to practice hyper growth, and I got to practice autonomy and clarity of role and all these things previously, but deal was a pressure cooker,
I
right?
mean, I don't even think hypergrowth really is the right word
Yeah,
for it because too many other companies are called hypergrowth. This is like,
yeah, yeah, whatever's above that.
yeah,
um,
whatever's faster than that.
yeah, and it's also a global company, right? So if you
Mm,
think about
hmm.
my management team was based in Amsterdam, Mexico City, Singapore,
Ooh,
Sydney, um,
I feel like Australia is
UK.
the hardest one because it's like
Yeah, all
opposite.
over all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And then individual contributors. I just looked at this the other day because somebody had asked me. I think they were in 23 or 24 countries, my team specifically. So
And you had,
our
sorry, just to put this in perspective, how many people, I forgot to write this down, like how many people did you have on your team towards the end?
Yeah. We got up to about 140, 150
That's what I thought. Yeah.
across customer success, onboarding, and CS operations.
Wow.
So they're all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And so this stuff's hard enough, and then it's really hard in hypergrowth. Then you add on top of that, these are people that you've never met in person. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you have 1 or 2 hours overlap with lots of people,
Yeah.
and it's a whole nother thing. So that clarity of role that we were talking about earlier, that to me is absolutely critical. This is what your job is, and this is what's expected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And coming in, the first thing you have to do is understand where there's confusion in that role, because there always is, right? There's sales overlap, there's support overlap, there's if you're building out onboarding or implementation or services, if those are separate, the customer success manager specifically always has pieces of every single one of those jobs,
Yeah.
um, because of the nature of them sitting between the customer and the company. And so you really have to define those and clarify, right? So
Mm-hmm.
clarity of role, and that's where these 10 commandments come in, and it doesn't have to be 10, of course, and it's different. I've built a different set everywhere I've gone, and I've always used this example because it's like tablets. Here's the stuff we're going to put in stone. This is what we care about, and it's laying out to them what we care about as a company, right? So it might be something like, we get back to clients when they reach out to us, right? We get back to them quickly, and we always add value.
Mm.
That might be one of my commandments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by always add value, what I mean is, responding to an email is not it. It's not just, yep, I got it, or they ask a very specific question and you give a very specific answer. I want them to get back to them, and I want them to always add value. Why
Mm.
are they asking a question? Use it as an opportunity. Send them a white paper. Do something above and beyond that they're going to go, every time I talk to Jason, he adds value.
Hmm.
You don't want it to be support, right?
Right. Right.
A support team's job is to fix something that's broken, catalog a question, give the answer. Um, a lot of that, I could just talk to Chat GPT if that's all I need, right? I want a CSM that's going to add value to the conversation. So that's one that's almost universally always in my commandments, right?
Yeah.
The second one is, so at Deal we used a platform called Vitally. Shout out to the Vitally team. Great platform. But whether it's Gainsight or Catalyst or Vitally or Churn Zero, it doesn't matter. I had the phrase and used it weekly at least. If it's not in Vitally, it didn't happen,
Mm.
right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't want
Mm-hmm.
I don't want excuses. When you're at that size, uh, I can't just have personal conversations with everybody, right? And especially when you're global, um, very real situation. CEO, someone, our CEO Alex at Deal was very accessible to the public, and people would
Mm.
DM him on LinkedIn, they'd text him on WhatsApp,
Really?
right? And they'd tweet at him, and uh, he always got right back to him and said, "I'm looking into it." And then he'd text me or he'd text whoever, and he'd go, uh, "Client's pissed about this," or "So and so's pissed about that." If I jump into our platform, I want to be able to read up on that client. I don't want to have to reach out to the CSM. I want to protect the CSM from these things. But if they're not doing their role, if they're not documenting what's happening, if I go in and I don't see any notes, I don't see any QBRs, I don't see anything, what am I supposed to say to Alex when he says, "What's the latest?" As
Yeah.
opposed to coming back and go, "No, we just met with him last week, and here was the conversation, and here's a couple things that are outstanding." And I can do that with 2 minutes work when a
Right.
CSM is doing their job, right?
And I
So
think,
so that's always a commandment. Right?
yeah, I mean, I think there are so many pieces of value in that one. And one of the biggest, like you said, is just, okay, then it takes me 2 minutes, right? And so being able to save everybody's time, that's so important during hypergrowth. And I think I'm now realizing that this would probably be called a commandment, but sometimes I talk about when I was at Zenefits and they grew from, I can't remember what the ARR was, but I was the 54th employee and they had 1,100 employees by the time I left a year later.
Yeah, we were neighbors. Intello was next door. I was on the third floor at 202 Folsom.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Or
So you saw the
303.
backpacks and the
Oh yeah.
hoodies.
We were on the floor. Yeah.
Yeah. But Parker would always say, and we used what was it called? Confluence, as like our knowledge base. And he always said, if you have a question about something, check Confluence. If it's not in Confluence, go ask someone, find out the answer, and then write it in Confluence.
And then put it in Confluence.
Confluence. And it was, and he would say it at every single all hands meeting, and the, managers and pretty much everybody, if you ask them a question, they will say, did you check Confluence?
Yeah.
And then
you have to always have to preface with that too, right? So when CSMs would ping me about something, an escalation or whatever, or their managers would, that was my first question too. Is it captured?
Right.
Is it captured? Like, I don't want to have this conversation until the notes are in place, and then we'll add to them, right?
Because that tribal knowledge, if you don't get it documented somewhere, and of course as a CSM, that's specific conversations about the customer. In the case of Zenefits, it was like, what are the specific rules for these different carriers in different states? And there's so much information that if everybody just keeps it in their head, then the hypergrowth just can't happen.
Right. And there is one other piece that I think is important as well. It's easy for Parker or Alex at Deal. It's easy for them to say, do this, right? They're the CEO. They can say what they want.
Sure.
It's important at the leadership level, at my level, at a manager level. They need to understand why. Like, so I said all the time, if it's not vitally, it didn't happen. However, I also took the time, and that example I shared, right? I would share those kind of examples. I would give shout outs. So I'd come into an all hands and I would explain, an escalation happened last week, and I went in, and Robin, your notes were phenomenal, right? And I avoided, right? Because you're in Slack, and Alex would pull leaders into Slack, and he'd say, he'd call it client or whatever, whoever the client was, and he would start pinging people, right? So if I could come in within a minute, and just paste bullets from the CSM, everything is smooth,
and
right?
It makes
there,
you look
right?
good.
It makes our team look good. It makes our team look like we're adding value, right? And CSMs are all doing that. They're all having those conversations, but other teams don't get that. And so if it's not documented, right, you're making our profession look bad, right?
Yeah.
When I can squash something in 30 seconds because the CSM did their job well, that's what it's about, right? So you also have to make sure the team understands how it all works, how the data rolls up, why it's important that they capture these individual things. We're reporting off of it, right?
Yeah.
We're reporting, and the board sees these kind of things. We're trying to represent what we're doing as a company, as a team. And when you don't document it, you are impacting the entire team, right? So as opposed to just do it because we told you to do it. There's so much busy work. Don't just tell them it's busy work. Like, explain the rationale and why you as a leader need it. It's really critical.
Yeah. And giving those specific examples of praise. Like, I have a almost 2-year-old, and one of the things that like the parenting books always say is like give your kid praise in front of other people for things that they're doing right. Like
Right.
she helped me, clean up her Legos before we decided to play with another toy. And I try to do that as often as I can, even if it's just to my husband, but it really reinforces that positive behavior because they're going to want to do it again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've always been, but at Deal we really got to test it because the team was large and global.
Yeah.
But leaderboards, right? To me,
Yeah.
that's that same concept. Not only just laying out to the team what good looks like, right? But
Yeah.
calling out specifically, hey, Sky this week, he he's in first place on the leaderboard.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing
Mm-hmm.
all the things we want, the activities that we're looking for, the KPIs that those generate, and praising, so that the team know what good looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes the individual feel great. It makes your child feel great, but it also reinforces what it is you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
also, now I want to be that person that you're talking about at the all
Right.
hands meeting.
Well, and scaling teams and growing teams, what you just called out is a really important part because yes, that's what you want to do. It's not for everybody, right?
Yeah.
A company like Deal that grows 10x in 18 months, and the pressure cooker and the right, it's just a lot. It's a lot, and
Yeah.
so when you establish what good looks like, and then you track it, and you help people understand kind of where they're at, what you find is the folks that you already suspected were at the top. What do you know? They're at the top. Uh, Folks that you suspected were at the top or weren't sure, and if they pop up in the middle, but now they know the measuring stick,
Yeah.
right? So some of the best CSMs I had at Deal, they weren't originally at the top of the leaderboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were in the middle, or even some of them were at the bottom, and they wanted to know each metric that went into it, and then they would say with their manager, okay, here's what I'm going to do, and they would start changing the way they did their job so that they popped up on the top of that
Yeah.
leaderboard. They wanted to be in the top five, right? And then other people kind of separate themselves out. The folks that are in the middle or towards the bottom and aren't looking to change that, they kind of determine for themselves, hey, you know what good looks like at this team,
Yeah.
and that's okay, right? This team's not for everybody,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot of times those people find their way out, or if not, you've got the coaching plan and the pips, and you've got the
Yeah.
data to follow it.
Yeah. And the way that you're describing this sounds to me a lot like sales. And we've talked about this before, how you think that there is a lot that customer success can learn from sales, which I think is an interesting point to call out because customer success is so new and the strategy is so different at different companies. But that idea of looking at, okay, what is the end goal that we want? What are those main KPIs we want, retention to be here, and we want, to grow these logos, whatever, but to peel back and say, okay, then what are people doing on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, on an hourly basis? What are the activities that people are doing to drive those outcomes?
Yeah. I think I think customer success by nature, to give it a break, it's pretty nuanced, right? And
Yes.
it's a generic label that gets used in different ways at different companies, right?
Yep.
So it
Titles
might
are
be
different.
yeah, glorified support, uh,
Account
or
managers and
account managers, or what. There's so many different pieces. But sales software sales in particular is pretty dialed in.
yeah.
I do think they're learning right now that wow, maybe customer success is quite important, and we need to be selling to the base and not always worried about new logos, right?
Yes.
But that's another conversation. I'm gonna set that aside.
We can
Uh,
circle back
say,
to that.
Sales has a funnel, right?
Yes.
And I can ask any sales leader, uh, they have a quota, they know what they're supposed to hit, and they can tell you we need X amount of SDR calls to get to Y qualified leads, to get to the demo, to get to serious consideration, right? It's
Yep.
fully baked, and it goes all the way upstream. Marketing knows in front of that how many ads they need to buy to get the SDRs in the right conversations, right? And it is a science, and it is, yes, a good sales leader is making the odds better, right? They're changing a closing rate from 25 to 30% because that's going to have an impact.
Yep.
Customer success needs to do more of that. And the reason I really hone in on the sales, it's not because we need to be exactly like sales, but it's not too often that I come across someone where I have to convince them customer success needs empathy, right? Or customer success needs to want to engage with clients. They all do that naturally, right?
Right.
The people that gravitate towards customer success typically have those pieces naturally. They
Yep.
like people, they're empathetic, they want to help solve problems, right? So it's usually, in my experience at least, uh, the management consultant practices, I'm biased there, coming from that world, or the sales practices, consultative selling. Those are skills that CSMs don't usually have naturally.
Right. Right.
So I'm biased towards giving them those skills and training on those pieces and having them think more like a sales team does, right? What does my book look like? Where are there opportunities? What conversations can I have? What questions should I be asking to flush out whether or not there's growth opportunity here,
Yep.
or whether or not there's churn risk? We need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And almost every success leader I've ever talked to tells me that selling customer success and its value internally is a never-ending challenge. And there are definitely, CEOs on every end of the spectrum, some that really get it, some that don't as much. But I mean, how have you had to sell CS internally, and how do you typically do that?
Yeah, I think you constantly do, right? And sometimes it's selling what is CS, and
Mm,
sometimes it's selling what CS shouldn't be, right? At Directly, for example, two startups back, um, phenomenal CEO. Anthony was obsessed with customers, and had like uh, knew all of them by heart. To talk to folks regularly. He was a great CEO. He was hands on with all the clients,
mm,
um, and that's fantastic, right? But when I got in and started looking at data, it was very clear that our revenue was coming from like five customers, right?
yeah,
Airbnb was one of our largest customers and an investor. Xbox, well, Microsoft. Microsoft as a company was a huge investor,
yeah,
and so I had to convince Anthony of the opposite. I had to say we shouldn't be talking to these other customers. Our team's not big enough. Our team's not big enough. We can't be all things to all people, and
yep,
there are huge opportunities in these ones that are driving the revenue. So I just did a full assessment, and it was a lot of manual work, and it was pulling as much data as I could, and then lots of manual work, but asking we had operations team, we had expert education for those freelancers doing support. We had CSMs, we had onboarding, we had launch or implementation, um, and I literally just cataloged hours. How much are you spending with each of these clients?
mm,
And then we came up with a ratio, and it was how much revenue do we receive from this client for every hour of work that we put into them. And when we made it that clear, and we said, look, we're making $2,500 every hour we spend with Microsoft, and here we're making 50, right? That's
yep,
not even that's not including the salaries, right? So we're losing significant money every time we talk to
yeah,
certain customers. So to get buy-in, you have to speak the language of the leader, right? So if a CEO gets CS, the conversation is more nuanced, and it is This is how we need to segment. This is how we need to think
Yes.
about it. Here's the data pieces we don't have. It's those kind of aspects. If the leader doesn't understand CS, it's helping them understand the value that the team is bringing or will be bringing, right? In CS, we rattle these things off, but a lot of people don't know it, right?
Yeah.
It costs 7 times more to bring in a new logo than it does to just retain and grow that revenue at the same amount, right?
Yeah.
7 times more. But that's not the model, right? Sales is very comfortable in, I know how to bring in new logos. I know where to put fuel. So you have to talk their language. So if it's efficiency, if it's profitability, if it's resource driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like using headcount conversations in the same way. Like, hey, if you want me to be all things to all people, I can do that. I had these conversations at Deal, like because it was, we need every single customer to have a customer success manager. We had 16,000 clients. I said, I can do that. Let me show you how we can do that. And here's how many people we'd need to hire to do that.
Yeah.
Or we can do digital touch and long tail and right, and then medium, and here's where the investments can go. You got to talk their language.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit again. So, and you kind of talked about there are certain people that do very well at startups, but it takes a very specific kind of person. But one of the biggest draws of joining a startup rather than a larger corporation is this idea that as the company grows, that it will also supercharge your career.
Yeah.
And so as a leader, as you're growing the team from 25 to 140 at Deal in 2 years,
Yeah.
how do you know when to promote internally versus hiring leadership externally?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that is so much art, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to do well, but it's really important to focus on.
Yeah.
I think all of it needs transparency. I essentially think out loud with my team. So I explain things. I explain, hey, we're going to bring in some outside leadership because we've got a great team here and everyone's doing a great job, but we want to bring in leaders that have done this before to help shortcut some of the pain points, right? We want to hire. So I want to promote internally whenever I can, and I need to be able to make a path for teams. That's much easier at Hypergrowth. So I know, folks will be listening and say, well, yeah, when you are hiring 100 people or 100
Sure.
roles, yeah, it's not super hard to promote.
Yeah.
But there is another aspect. I'll come back to people not being ready for promotion.
Yeah.
But in hiring those teams, I want to bring in outside enough so that it's not all homegrown and it's not all one person, especially in scaling. One person can't train all the inexperienced management, right?
Sure.
But I want to train as much as I can, and I want to give opportunity as much as I can. So rather than promotions, what I'm a big fan of is project-based ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
So especially when you first come in and join a company, I'm asking. I came into Deal. I'm asking 20 people, what's going well, what's not going well, what does the team need to be focused on, all these things. So that helps to fill that vision and spell that out. But it also creates a bunch of assignments, a bunch of stuff that needs to get done.
Yeah.
And so any of those folks that are there when I get in on the ground, anybody that's there, I want to understand kind of what their interest is long term. I'm asking them that.
Yeah.
And when I'm asking them what's wrong and what's right and what needs to be fixed, they're giving you project ideas of things that they could work on, right? And so I offer up those projects rather than have a CS ops team take everything or just the management take everything. I want the individual contributors to take those on, because number one, they're passionate about it. You're
Mm-hmm.
trying to help them make their job easier.
Yeah.
Number two, you're giving them an ability to stretch. You're giving them ownership and taking lead on something, and they're going to have to do the cross-functional stuff. That's what managers do, and that's what directors do, right? So you can give them a little piece and see how they do with it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's low risk. If I promote someone, if I take an IC that I think is great, and they're smart and they're sharp and they're driven, and I put them into manager and they're not prepared for that,
Yeah.
and I don't have the ability to train them because I haven't hired enough outside people, and I'm just going to be stretched too thin, I've set them up to fail,
Right.
right? So everybody wants the promotion, everybody wants the path, but it's uh, you want to do that in such a way where you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
If I just take anybody and say that's your job now, go do it, that's really tough to do, especially in hypergrowth.
Yep.
So that's kind of how I think about promotions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen companies make that mistake where all of a sudden all these ICs are promoted into management. And then not only do they not get any management training, but they're also in interviews all day long because they're growing their
Right,
team. And then all of a
right.
sudden, the ICs that report to them are kind of lost and they're not getting any coaching and they don't feel supported, and then morale just plummets.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and that's something you have to consistently remind managers of,
yeah.
right? Your job is to manage the team, to coach, to understand what they need help with, and it is really hard, right? I mean, it's really hard to do right when
Yeah.
things are moving as fast as they are, or fast as they are in hypergrowth. But that's where the investment pays off. Like, trying to stamp out everything, um, one at a time, you're just never going to do it.
Yeah.
Oh. In fact, um, I've got an analogy on this.
Tell me.
So the way I come in and lead, and especially at Deal, where I stepped in, they were already doing quite well from a revenue perspective,
Yeah.
already growing very quickly. I stepped in. I joined in October, like September, October,
Mm-hmm.
and we had just hit 30 million. And during the interview process, Alex said, we're going to hit 50 million by the end of the year, right? So in October, he's telling me we're going to hit 50 million by December. And I just thought, he's crazy, but I like the gumption. We
Yeah.
closed the year. We closed the year at 57. We surpassed 50 million.
Whoa.
But
Almost double in 2 months, pretty much.
yeah, yeah. So it was moving, right? And so
Yeah.
I use an analogy at Deal. I used this with the team when I first came. So I'm from California, and so unfortunately I know too much about wildfires and
Mm-hmm.
how they're fought.
Yep.
Um, but I think it's a really good analogy for customer success, right? Well, specifically for a leader coming in to lead customer success, right?
Yeah.
Um, Fires. When something's on fire, the temptation is just to get the hose and start shooting, right? You just shoot into the fire and hope, right? Or you get your big boot and you're stomping out whatever's right in front of you,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and that works. That puts the fire out that's right in front of you, but everything around you is on fire. So I used this concept of wildfires. So not just fire, not just everything's on fire, but specifically a wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
So in California, when a wildfire breaks out, they don't just parachute into the middle of the fire or
Right.
show up with the hoses and shoot it. They first work to contain the fire, right? So they don't go into the fire. They go to the perimeter of the fire and
Mm-hmm.
they try to stop it from spreading, right? So to fight a wildfire, to actually put a fire out, it's not firefighting that does it, right? It's containment.
Hmm.
You have to go to the outsides, and they bulldoze, they remove any fuel they can, so they pull the grasses out, they knock trees down, they do whatever around the outside perimeter of the
Yep.
fire, so that it stops spreading, so it stops hopping over highways and things, right? So they contain it first. And once they have it contained, and that's what they talk about. So you'll see fire, they talk about containment. They don't
Yep.
say
They
is the
always talk
fire
about
out.
containment.
So if
15% contained, 50% contained.
so
Yep.
fire can be 100% contained and it's still on fire,
Yeah.
right? The fire, there's still
Yeah.
flames, but 100% contained means it's not spreading anymore. We've got it. And then they close in on it, right? And that's how you have to think about customer success specifically. I mean, I think it's a firefighting job, right?
Yeah.
Until you wrap it. But specifically in hypergrowth, you have to contain first. So you have to come in and go, okay, what is murdering our team, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that are just crazy? And you have to try to block those first to contain that fire. And that's how you move from reactive to proactive over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this concept of don't just go in and firefight. If your team is firefighting, they're going to firefight forever,
Right.
because stuff's going to happen. But go look at the fire, examine it, understand why it's spreading, and then contain it. Contain it first, and then that's when you start focusing on the customer success best practices and all that stuff. Once you have it contained.
Huh. Your first CS leadership role was at Intello. What is something that you know now that you wish you knew then?
Oh, good question. Good question. Um, oh man. So I was hired at Intello to build out enterprise customer success, right? So that was my first role, and I was an individual contributor first. I took on all the the biggest enterprise clients,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had to build out a team and hire, and literally the first hire, and then building that out. I think actually I think that analogy I just shared. What do I wish
Yeah.
I knew? Was don't just run into the fire, right? It's very easy to let your inbox, let your meetings, let all of these things rule your day, right?
Yeah.
CSM has to own their calendar, and they have to own their day, and they have to be proactive and have heads down time to think about their book strategically. And I do think my management consulting helped with that a little bit, but the people pleaser in me, the person that wanted to help everyone and
Mm-hmm.
has the empathy and likes to be around people, that's what was doing me in, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to be all things to all people. And so I think that's really important is that firefighting mode. If at Intello I had come in more strategically out of the gate, I think that would have helped us be more successful more quickly, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, where I landed there, was understanding that regular engagement with clients. So like, what do I wish I'd known? Bring more structure into the role. What did I learn the most at Intello, and what were my takeaways that I took to the
Mm-hmm.
next company? Regular engagement, right? Even a client that's frustrated with you regularly, but talking to you, that is so much better than the clients that go quiet, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a naturally optimistic person. Yep, everything's great over there. Don't worry about it. They haven't had any issues that they've told me about. Those quiet clients are the ones that those are the surprises, right? Those are the
Yeah.
ones that say we're not renewing, or we're going to your biggest competitor, or whatever.
Yeah.
That regular engagement, the critical nature of regular engagement at the place where it makes sense. I'm talking about enterprise, large
Right.
revenue, right? But engaging with them regularly, adding best practices, adding value, and engaging with them. That's really important.
Great. So Jason, what's next?
What's next? So so I left Deal in June,
Mm-hmm.
and just I needed I needed a breather.
Yeah.
And frankly, they were at the stage uh, where I get bored, to be
Yeah.
honest. I love building. I love figuring out and solutioning and putting structure in place and building that out. That's not what they need going
Yeah.
forward. They need straight execution, which is just less interesting for me. So as I stepped away, I had a couple of things just fall in my lap, to be honest. But it helped me move into consulting. I'm doing consulting. I'm working with a few different startups and just trying to help them in their efforts.
Yeah.
And I'm gravitating towards those early companies. Um, so not so much seed, but I'm working with a couple Series A, Series B firms that are understanding that customer success is something you have to think about strategic earlier, right? So instead of waiting till your Series C or late B, and now you've got all the sales, and now we're bleeding because people are
Yeah.
churning.
Yeah. No thanks.
Deal with that up front, right?
Yeah.
So I'm helping folks with their all things post sales, right? What's that customer journey look like? What's the engagement model? How are you structuring the team? How are you thinking about that? Do you have folks here that make for those early leaders, and when's the time to bring in a pro versus let the team grow and expand.
Yeah.
So I'm really enjoying that. Um, that being said, I know I'll be back at it at some point. I love the building. I love building teams. I love building structure. Being on the outside, it's just different, right? It's just
Yeah.
different when you're consulting and saying, here's how I think about it, and here's what I'd recommend, as opposed to, hey team, this is what we're going to do together, right? I was catching up with Anthony, who was the CEO at Directly, a couple weeks ago, and just picking his brain a little bit and get some advice, and he said, yeah, the consulting is definitely a great gig for you. I think you can bring a ton of value and share that across other startups. But then he just kind of smiled and said, but I know that you're going to fall in love with the startup soon enough and be right back at it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's probably right. So right now I'm really enjoying consulting. I'm enjoying getting a little flavor of different pieces from the outside. But I'm sure as soon as that right one comes along, I'll be ready to build again.
Cool. Well, I can't wait to see which. I don't know, I hate the word rocket ship, but that's really the type of company you typically join. So I'm curious to see which one you pick in the future. But Jason, thank you so much for your time. I always love talking to you. Super insightful.
Yeah, it's great to catch up, and let's do it again.
Cool. Sounds good. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, see you.